I guess I should start by saying that I never thought I'd be in this position. I mean, when I got married, I truly believed that my husband and I would be different from the others. We'd be the ones who made it work, the ones who never gave up. But life, as it turns out, doesn't always go according to plan, and people, well, they change. I changed. Maybe even more than I realize. But it's hard to put everything into words without sounding like I'm making excuses, so let me take you back to how everything started. We were so young when we got married. I was 24 and he was 26. At the time, it felt like we had all the time in the world. We were this couple that everyone envied, the ones who had it all figured out. We bought a small house, a little fixer-upper, and spent weekends working on it together. Everything was about building something, and in the beginning, it was perfect. It was just us against the world. We saved up for everything. But when we started working on this car, this old clunker we found online, I began to feel like I was working on the wrong thing. The car, the house, the routine, it all started to feel like it was all we had. Maybe I was the one who wanted more. Maybe it was because I'd spent so many years focused on building a life. I forgot about building me, the me that I used to be, before the house, before the car, before the marriage. I hadn't realized how distant I'd gotten from myself. My husband, let's call him Mark for now, was this stable, dependable guy. He had his flaws, sure. He was a little too focused on the practical side of life sometimes, and I always joked about how he didn't know how to live in the moment. He was always planning for the next step. But, hey, that's what made him a great husband, right? He wasn't reckless. He was the type of guy who'd never let me down. But as the months turned into years, something changed. I'm not sure when exactly, but I started to feel bored. Not with him, per se, but with the monotony of it all. The car was supposed to be a big project, something we could do together. But I felt like it was just another thing on the list of things we had to complete. And every time we'd go out to work on it, I'd just feel empty. It was as if I was waiting for something else to come into my life. Something exciting, something new. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew it wasn't at home. At least, not in the way I thought it would be. Then, of course, there was Jason. Jason was a friend, and that's how it all started. It was innocent at first. Just a few conversations over coffee, talking about life. He was funny. He made me laugh in a way that felt so different from Mark's steady calm. Jason was spontaneous, and his energy was infectious. He was exactly the kind of person I needed when I was feeling so stuck. Looking back, I realize now that I was just craving attention. I needed someone to make me feel alive again, to make me feel seen, not just as a wife or a homemaker or a worker, but as a person. Jason gave me that. He asked about my day, about my dreams, about the things that mattered to me. Mark never really did that anymore. I don't want to blame Mark entirely. He worked hard, and I get that. But somehow, somewhere, he stopped noticing me in the way he used to. And I let it go on. Maybe I was too scared to admit that I felt neglected, or maybe I was too proud. But with Jason, it was different. At first, it was innocent enough, just talks here and there. But soon, those talks turned into texts, and those texts turned into late-night conversations. Jason would compliment me, genuinely. He'd say things like, "You're so much more interesting than the usual crowd I hang out with." Or, "You have this energy that makes everything seem fun." It felt nice, I'll admit it. It felt like I was being noticed for the first time in years. I guess that's when I started to feel conflicted. I knew something was changing in me. I wasn't the person I used to be, the person who would have laughed off the idea of cheating. But it was hard not to get drawn into something that made me feel desired. I'm not proud of it, but looking back, I know I wanted more from Jason. Not just attention, but something deeper. Maybe I was looking for a way out, or maybe I just didn't want to face the reality that my marriage was starting to feel like a cage. And one night, after one of our conversations, Jason asked if I wanted to grab a drink. I knew I shouldn't, but I said yes. It wasn't like I was planning anything. I wasn't thinking of cheating, but I was lonely, and I thought a night out would be fun. And that's when things took a turn. The night we went for drinks wasn't anything special, or at least, it didn't seem special at the time. We met at this little bar downtown, a place I'd been to a few times before, but this time felt different. Jason was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table in the corner, with 2 glasses of wine in front of him. He smiled when he saw me, and there was this spark in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. I wasn't used to that kind of attention. We talked for hours. It wasn't just small talk, it was real conversation. The kind of deep stuff that I'd forgotten how to have. Jason asked me about my past, about my dreams, about the things that scared me. It felt like he was listening to me, really listening, in a way I hadn't felt in ages. Mark, my husband, he used to listen to me too, but somewhere along the way it had become more about how he could fix things, rather than why I felt the way I did. But Jason, he wasn't trying to fix me, he just understood. I didn't plan on staying out too late. I had work the next day, and I knew Mark would be wondering where I was. But the hours slipped by, and before I knew it, we were both a little tipsy and laughing about some inside joke that probably wasn't even funny. I remember feeling like the world outside that little bar didn't matter anymore. I could feel my inhibitions melting away with every drink, with every laugh. I wasn't thinking about the fact that I was married or that I had responsibilities. I wasn't thinking about anything except the way Jason made me feel. At some point, he asked if I wanted to go for a walk. He seemed so calm, so easygoing. I agreed, and we stepped outside into the cool night air. We walked around the block, and for a while, there was silence. But it wasn't awkward silence. It was comfortable. It felt like we were both just existing in the same space, enjoying each other's company. I should have stopped it there. I should have gone home. But when he took my hand, I didn't pull away. Instead, I let him. And that's when I knew things were going to shift. I had crossed a line, and it scared me. But I didn't stop. I let him hold my hand, and I let him lead me down a path I wasn't sure I could get off. Jason leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't some dramatic, passionate kiss, but it was enough. It was everything I had been craving, the feeling of being wanted, of being seen in a way that made my heart race, and it felt like my whole body was screaming at me to pull away, to go home, to stop. But I didn't. We ended up at his apartment that night. I remember sitting on his couch, feeling the warmth of his body next to mine. My head was spinning, but in that moment, it felt right. Like the universe had aligned, and all the confusion and all the emptiness I'd been feeling had finally made sense. I wasn't thinking about Mark. I wasn't thinking about the future or the consequences. I was just there, with Jason. It wasn't anything dramatic. We didn't make love. But we kissed again, and it felt good. It felt like a relief from everything that had been building up inside me, and I didn't feel guilty in that moment. I didn't feel shame. I just felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. The next morning, when I woke up on his couch, everything hit me all at once. Reality came crashing back. My phone was buzzing in my pocket, and I knew it was Mark. I had no idea how I was going to explain myself. I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want to lose my family, but I also didn't want to keep living a lie. I left Jason's apartment before he woke up. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that I'd put everything behind me and pretend like it never happened. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the end. I knew that I was only scratching the surface of something that was already too far gone. When I got home that morning, Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, looking at me with a mix of confusion and concern. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me, waiting for some kind of explanation. I couldn't look him in the eye. I couldn't tell him what I had done. I wanted to, but the words wouldn't come out. I went to the bathroom to freshen up, but the guilt was already eating at me. How could I have done this to him? How could I have betrayed him like that? I loved Mark. I thought I loved Mark. But something inside me had snapped, and I couldn't put it back together. I didn't know how to face him after that. But I had to. Because, in the back of my mind, I knew something was coming. I couldn't run from it forever. Mark would find out. It was only a matter of time. It didn't take long for the truth to come crashing down. A few days after that night, I was at home, trying to act like everything was normal. I didn't know how to look Mark in the eye anymore. I kept making excuses to avoid him, staying out longer than usual, pretending I was busy with work or running errands. It wasn't like me, and I knew it wasn't fooling him. He could sense it. Mark had always been the type to trust me maybe too much. He never questioned where I was or what I was doing, but I knew he was starting to see the distance between us. One afternoon, I came back from the store, and I saw Mark sitting on the couch, his phone in his hand. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I walked past him, I noticed the expression on his face. It was a mix of confusion, hurt, and something I hadn't seen in him before, anger. It was all over his face, and for a split second, I felt my heart drop into my stomach. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at me. "You were with him, weren't you?" I froze. The way he said it wasn't a question, it was a statement, and he already knew the answer. Jason, he must have seen the messages. Maybe he'd found the texts or the call logs on my phone. I had left my phone lying around a couple of times, and I knew I hadn't been careful enough. I opened my mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. What could I say? How could I explain what had happened? How could I make sense of the mess I had made? The guilt washed over me like a wave, and I felt like I was drowning in it. Mark stood up slowly, his eyes still on me, and for a moment, I thought he was going to walk out. Maybe he should have. But he didn't. Instead, he just shook his head, like he was trying to understand. How long? The question hung in the air, thick and suffocating. How long had I been lying? How long had I been leading him on? I couldn't bring myself to answer. How do you tell someone you love them when you've already betrayed them? How do you tell someone they mean everything to you, but you've done something that could shatter everything? Just tell me, Laura, he said quietly, his voice cracking. Please? I finally looked up at him, and the tears started. I could see the hurt in his eyes, the same eyes that had always trusted me, always believed in us. It was like I was seeing him for the first time again, and it killed me. I took a deep breath, wiped my face, and said the words that I never thought I'd have to say. I kissed him. Jason, it was just one time, but I don't know what happened. It wasn't planned. It wasn't anything you did, it was me. I was just so confused, and I don't know what I was looking for, but it wasn't you. There it was, the truth. It felt like my world had crumbled around me, and I didn't know how to pick up the pieces. Mark didn't say anything for a long time. He just stood there, his face pale, like he'd been punched in the gut. I could tell he was trying to process what I'd said. He was still waiting for some kind of explanation that would make sense of everything. But there was no making sense of it. There was no easy way out. He finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Why would you do that to me? I didn't have an answer. I couldn't explain it, because I didn't even understand it myself. How do you explain that you were so desperate for something that you didn't even know you needed? How do you explain that you wanted someone else's attention because you felt invisible in your own marriage? I don't know, I said, choking on the words. I never wanted to hurt you, but I did. Mark looked down at the floor, his hands shaking slightly. I've been with you for years, Laura, and I thought I knew you, but now I don't even know who you are anymore. The words stung, and I couldn't stop the tears from flowing. It was the truth, and it hurt. I had changed. I had become someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could betray the person who had loved her unconditionally. And now I was standing there, watching him fall apart, knowing I was the one who had done it to him. He didn't yell. He didn't get angry, at least not in the way I expected. Instead, he just shook his head again and walked out of the room. The door slammed behind him, and for the first time in years, I felt completely alone. I knew that this was the beginning of the end. Mark came back a few hours later, his face drawn and tired, but there was a coldness in his eyes that I'd never seen before. He told me he needed some time to think, that he couldn't stay in the same house with me after what had happened. I begged him to stay to work through it, but he didn't. He said he needed space to figure out what he wanted. And just like that, he was gone. I sat there for hours, staring at the empty space he left behind. My mind was racing. What had I done? How could I fix this? And was it even worth trying? I couldn't stop thinking about Jason. But I knew deep down that what I had with Mark was worth fighting for. At least, it used to be. But now, I didn't know if I could come back from this. And I didn't know if Mark would ever forgive me. I spent the next few days in a haze. The house felt too quiet without Mark. The silence was deafening, and every corner I looked at reminded me of how I had ruined everything. The things that once brought me comfort, the smell of Mark's coffee in the morning, the way he'd hum along to the radio when he worked in the garage, were gone. I realized how much I had taken it all for granted, how much I had neglected the life we had built together. I didn't know where he was, or if he was coming back, but he hadn't contacted me. I kept telling myself that I would give him space, that I would respect his need for time, but the waiting was unbearable. I wanted to fix things, to take back the mistakes, but I knew that wasn't possible. All I could do was wait. And that's when Jason reached out to me. I hadn't expected it. In fact, I was hoping that I wouldn't hear from him again, that the whole thing would stay in the past. But one morning, my phone buzzed with a message from him. "Hey, are you okay? I've been thinking about you." The words stung, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't like I wanted to be with him, not in the way that I had before. But he had been a part of a life that now felt like a mistake, and I couldn't shake the pull to him. I had crossed a line with Mark, but with Jason I hadn't. He was still a safe haven in my mind, someone who had made me feel alive when I was numb. I debated ignoring him, but I couldn't. Maybe I needed to talk to someone, to try to make sense of the mess I'd created. So, I replied, "I'm not okay, Jason. I messed everything up. I hurt someone I love." Jason responded almost immediately. "I know. I've been thinking about it too. But, Laura, you need to figure out what you really want. You can't keep running away from what's right in front of you." Those words hit me harder than I expected. He was right. I couldn't keep running from my mistakes. I couldn't keep pretending that the connection I had with Jason was more than what it was. And I couldn't keep pretending that what I had with Mark was disposable. But I didn't know how to make it right. How could I fix what was already broken? I had betrayed Mark's trust in a way that could never be undone. Even if we tried to move forward, things would never be the same. Could we rebuild? Or was it too late? The next few days felt like a blur. Mark didn't come home, and I didn't hear from him. I left him messages apologizing, begging him to come back. I told him I was sorry for everything. But I also told him I was lost. That I didn't know how to fix what I'd done, but that I was willing to try. And then, just when I thought I couldn't handle the waiting anymore, he came back. It wasn't some grand gesture. There were no dramatic confrontations or tearful reunions. Mark came home like he always did, quiet, reserved, but with a heaviness in his eyes. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me like he was trying to figure out if he could still trust me. And for the first time in a long time, I was the one who couldn't look him in the eye. I knew what I had done. I knew how much I had hurt him. Mark spoke first, his voice steady, but with an edge I hadn't heard before. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Lara. I don't know if I can look at you the same way after what happened." I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. I knew this was coming. I knew I had no right to ask him for forgiveness, but I still had to try. "I don't expect you to forgive me right now," I said, my voice shaking. "But I need you to know that I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was selfish and confused, and I didn't think about how much I would hurt you. But I love you, Mark. I still do, and I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." He looked at me for a long time, and in that silence I could see the pain in his eyes. The same pain that I had caused. "I don't know if we can fix it, Lara," he said quietly. "I don't know if we can go back. I don't know if I can trust you again." My heart sank. I had no response. What could I say? How could I make him believe me? How could I show him that I was still the woman he had married, the woman he had trusted? "I don't know what to do," I whispered. "I don't either," he said. And then, almost reluctantly, he stepped toward me. "But I'm willing to try, if you are." I looked up at him, hope stirring in my chest, but also fear. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be no shortcuts, no magic fix. It would take time, and it would take work, trust, honesty, and maybe even therapy. But the fact that Mark was willing to try meant everything. It meant that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what had been broken. But it also meant that I had to face myself. I had to understand why I had made the choices I did, and figure out who I was in the process. I had to learn to be honest, not just with Mark, but with myself. Because without that, we wouldn't stand a chance. I'm willing to try too. I said finally. But it's going to take time. I know that, and I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust again. Mark nodded slowly, still unsure, but there was a flicker of something, maybe hope, maybe love, that told me he wasn't completely ready to give up on us just yet. And that was all I needed. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was willing to fight for it.